Welcome back, everybody, to the live webinar here at BINA. I hope everybody had an easy fast and a meaningful fast. So we all know that we need to be proud Jews. Jewish pride is very important. In fact, it's so important that in the first law of the Jewish code of law, of the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, Ramoisa Ishalish, who wrote his footnotes on the Shulchan Aruch, writes, that a person should not be embarrassed in front of the scoffers, the one who laughs at his Judaism. He should serve God, whether people like it, people laugh at you or not. In fact, the Torah writes that this is the very foundation of our avodas Hashem, of our service to God. This is, and I'll quote him, for this is a fundamental rule in the service of the Creator, may he be blessed, as a person will sometimes wish to perform a mitzvah, but abstain from doing so because of the people who ridicule him. The Mishnah therefore admonished that you should be brazen in the face of those who ridicule and not refrain from performing the mitzvah. And that is why it actually comes at the beginning of the Jewish code of law, because this is the foundation of everything, that we need to be proud that we're Jewish and not ashamed of our rituals, our customs, and our laws. However, having said that, if you look throughout the Jewish code of law and through Jewish law, we might find a few contradictions to this principle, and where sometimes we seem to be bowing to social pressure. For example, 2 days ago was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The law on Tisha B'Av, as we discussed on Monday, is that you have to wear non-leather shoes. Now, what happens in the scenario, in a case brought in the Jewish code of law, when a person lives in a non-Jewish neighborhood, only non-Jews live there, and if he or she walks through that neighborhood barefoot, it might look ridiculous and people might laugh at them. Says the Ramah, the same Ramoisa Ishalish who wrote that a person should not be embarrassed in front of people that will laugh at him, he says that you should put on leather shoes until you're out of that neighborhood. When you come to a Jewish neighborhood, you should put on the non-leather shoes or walk barefoot. That seems to be an open contradiction. Why are we suddenly caring what people have to say? And in fact, the Mishnah Brura writes on that, and he explains what's the reasoning. He says because people might laugh at him, people might think he's ridiculous and make fun of him, and therefore you are allowed to wear leather shoes until you're out of that environment. And that could be applicable today if one needs to go to work on Tisha B'Av, and it's not normal, if a person works in the courtroom and they walk into the courtroom with sneakers, it might look a little bit ridiculous, and there are leniencies in various cases to wear leather shoes in such a case. What we can say, perhaps, is that there's a difference between a biblical command and a rabbinic command. In fact, in the Jewish code of law, it says, in Shulchan Aruch, it says about Yom Kippur, the Mishnah Brura says about Yom Kippur, that in that case, you're not allowed to wear leather shoes in any scenario, whether you live amongst people who laugh at you or whether you don't. You need to wear non-leather shoes on Yom Kippur. What is the difference between Yom Kippur on the one hand and Tisha B'Av on the other hand? The difference is that Yom Kippur is a biblical command. It's from the Torah that we have to have 5 afflictions. We learn out. One of them is not to wear leather shoes. Tisha B'Av is a rabbinic day. The laws are rabbinic. Very important, but rabbinic and not biblical. This differentiation between whether something is rabbinic or biblical can be found in the Talmud, in Tractate Brachos, where it discusses a very interesting scenario. There is a prohibition in the Torah to wear shatnez. Shatnez means that we are not allowed to wear clothing with wool and linen woven together. There's no reason for this mitzvah, it's just because God says so, and that's why we don't do that. What happens if a person's walking in the street and they realize that their shirt has shatnez? Do they need to right then and there take off their shirt, even though that might make them look totally crazy? Someone's taking off their shirt in the middle of the street, or do they not have to? And the Talmud says it depends. If it's a rabbinic level of shatnez, and now not the time to get into the differentiation, but if it's only rabbinic, then you can leave on your shirt because of the dignity of creation, literally, which means basically to protect your own dignity. If it's biblical shatnez, then there's no such thing as personal dignity when it comes to God's laws, and therefore in that case, even if you're in the middle of the street, you'll be commanded to take off that garment. And the same thing would apply to shoes. Shoes on Tisha B'Av is rabbinic, and therefore we might be more lenient in cases where people will laugh at you or you might feel uncomfortable. Yom Kippur is biblical, and therefore we would be more strict. The only thing we have to go into a little into this in a little more depth, because at the end of the day, rabbinic mitzvahs are mitzvahs and they're commandments, and therefore if we have to be proud Jews, we should be proud Jews all the way. Especially since it does say in various sources that even just stringencies, what's called derech hasidus, just pious ways, extra stringencies, one needs to do them even if it causes embarrassment. So there is a way of differentiating when yes and when not. When do you have to be worried about? When can you care about being embarrassed and when can't you care? It all depends what they're laughing at. If someone is doing a mitzvah, if I'm keeping kosher, for example, I'm in the kosher aisle, I'm buying kosher food, and someone comes and says, and laughs and says, oh, this is ridiculous, kosher food is just a made-up law, whoever thought about such a ridiculous law? In such a case, I am forbidden to bow to social pressure, whether it's rabbinic or biblical. There could be kosher laws which are only rabbinic, but it doesn't make a difference. Because the actual commandment is being ridiculed, I am commanded to keep that commandment and be proud of the fact that I am a Jew. And that doesn't make a difference if it's rabbinic, biblical, custom. I need to be proud and not bow to social pressures in such a case. But how about if someone's not laughing at the mitzvah which I'm keeping, but they are laughing or they're scoffing, or the embarrassing situation is a situation which has been created through me keeping a mitzvah. So let's go to the shatnez example. If I'm in the middle of the street and I take off my shirt, the mitzvah there is not to walk around without a shirt. The mitzvah is not to wear shatnez. So what am I embarrassed of here? I'm not embarrassed of keeping the mitzvah. I'm not embarrassed of not wearing shatnez. I'm just embarrassed about the fact that I'm walking around the street without a shirt. There, in such a case, where it's the circumstance which is embarrassing and not the actual mitzvah, there might be a difference between biblical mitzvahs and rabbinic mitzvahs. So going back to the cases of the shoe, it's the same thing. You can, they're not laughing at the fact that there's a commandment not to wear leather shoes. The embarrassing situation there is the fact that I'm walking around bare feet. There's no commandment to walk around barefoot. The commandment is not to wear leather shoes, and therefore, since it's only the circumstance which has been caused by me keeping a commandment, which is embarrassing, there might make a difference in Tisha B'Av, Yom Kippur, rabbinic, or biblical. But again, in a case where the actual commandment is being laughed at, and the actual mitzvah is what's being scoffed at, there, we shouldn't be embarrassed, we should be proud in our ways and be a proud Jew. An interesting authority which may seem to disagree with this, or at least in this case, is the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim is very well known, the same person who wrote the Mishnah Brura. He discusses at length the idea of Lashon Hara, the idea of speaking bad about somebody else and listening to somebody talking bad about somebody else. And he says, what happens if you're part of a group of people and someone starts talking badly about somebody else? What should you do? So he says, the best thing to do is to leave the room, to just leave the conversation. If that's not possible, so what you should do is you should make sure not to believe anything that the person is saying. Obviously, we're not talking about in cases of danger or preventing danger. We're talking about just, someone saying some random bad thing about somebody. We're commanded not to believe it, unless proved otherwise. But he says you do not have to cover your ears with your hands and look like a complete fool, because we're not commanded to go that far. So you see an interesting exception there. It'll be interesting to figure out how exactly this all fits together. But the bottom line is that in regard to keeping mitzvahs, to keeping God's commandments, even if it's a custom, even if it's rabbinic, we need to be proud, and we need to walk around proud that we have these things and not be worried what other people have to say. If it's in a case where a circumstance is caused by keeping a commandment, and that's the embarrassing situation, there it might be different, like in the case of wearing shoes on Tisha B'Av on the 9th of Av. Have a wonderful day.